Welcome to the second week of our More Than mini-series, where we're going to be discussing biblical ideas about the church and how we can still be the church even during strange times such as these. We're using this phrase, more than, to look at some of the things that we're not able to do during the COVID-19 virus pandemic. And we're going to be talking about how the church is more than these things. And today we're going to be looking at how the church is more than a building.
Yeah, if we're honest, most of us have probably never thought about what church would be without having a building. Because for many of us, going to church always involved meeting and attending at an event in a building somewhere. But what if we didn't have a building? Or like right now, what if we were unable to meet in our building? How do we do church without a designated building to meet in? This kind of thing has happened to churches, many that we know of, and probably you know of, that have had natural disasters happen to them, or that it's left them without a building to meet in. I think of tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, fires.
I remember the Alabama tornado outbreak in 2011. I was a student at Faulkner University, and that tornado outbreak impacted several areas very severely in northern Alabama. One prominent church, the Central Church of Christ in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, during that tornado outbreak, actually lost their building completely. For more than a year after the initial destruction of the tornadoes, the church had no building to call their home while they were meeting there. So instead they met in homes, and eventually they actually met in the lobby of a volunteer fire station until they could build another building. And again, you probably know of other churches that have experienced this same kind of tragedy, unfortunately.
Yeah, but this unfortunate reality, honestly, it should lead us to ask some questions about the nature of the church. If a church loses their building, does this mean that they are no longer a church, or that they have become lesser than a church? Or if a church is planted in a neighborhood and decides to continually meet in homes, are they as much a church as another church who has decided to purchase land or a building? And especially now, if a church doesn't meet all together in a building in order to comply with requests for the purposes of public health safety, can it still fulfill its mission as the church?
If we look back in history, specifically the history of broad Christianity and how our predecessors have behaved in situations like this, it can help us to navigate what's happening in our world today and also navigate how to answer these kinds of questions. Because those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. We know that we are in strange times, but at the same time, we're not in anywhere near the kind of bad times that some of our brothers and sisters have faced. Our brothers and sisters in the past have been suppressed, persecuted, tortured, and even murdered for the cause of Christ. And governments have attempted to eradicate altogether Christianity in their nations. And we don't ultimately know what's going to come of our situation here. And we're hopeful that we're going to be able to return sooner rather than later to meet together. But what if we were never actually allowed to return to our church buildings? Or what if we were never allowed to return to any church building? Would we, as the church, know how to adapt to that situation? I think about the two major 20th century communist revolutions that took place in China and Russia. In China and Russia, these communist regimes were both ideologically opposed to religion, specifically Christianity. In Russia, the USSR was loud and proud about their atheism as a government. Whereas in China, the party was more generically antagonistic toward religious expression. In both communist revolutions, these governments came in and they seized church buildings and they arrested church leaders if they did not comply with regulations that were put on them. But the results of these religious suppressions in both of these countries played out very differently. You see, in Russia, the religious practice was dependent on the buildings that they met in and the official church leadership that was placed over them. So when the government took those things away from them, religious life in Russia essentially died because the people didn't know how to live their Christian lives or live their religious lives without a building and without leadership that was put over them. However, in China, the missionaries and church leaders that have been working there have been working very hard to equip the everyday Chinese Christian to have the ability personally to spread the gospel themselves, no matter what might happen. So when the buildings and the leadership and missionaries were sent away, arrested, and seized from Chinese Christians, the Chinese church went underground. And Christianity actually spread more rapidly in China than it ever had, because everyday Chinese Christians knew how to spread the gospel. They knew how to do it without a building. They knew how to do it without professional leadership over them. And in China, even today, Christianity is still largely underground and persecuted. And most churches in China nowadays actually use more of a house church network kind of model in order to spread the gospel. And there are still programs even in our own brotherhood like China Now where you can go and teach conversational English to Chinese university students by using the Bible in English as the study material. The Chinese church continues to grow leaps and bounds, usually with no more than a handful of people in each house church that meets, with no designated building for them to all gather together, because they've learned to adapt to a buildingless Christianity for a while.
When it comes to looking at the scriptures about this, I believe we're given many examples of Christians continuing the Lord's work without a specific building to meet in. We need to acknowledge, though, that there is a biblical expectations that Christians are meant to meet together regularly. However, for the first several decades of the Christian movement, most Christians met in homes and public gathering places or other outdoor venues in order to gather to worship God. There are multiple references in the New Testament of churches that met in houses that were likely owned by some of the wealthier church members. But our problem right now isn't that we don't have a building to meet in. It's that we are being prevented by current circumstances from meeting at our building together. And in that case, we also have to acknowledge that there is a biblical precedent for how to be the church when the church is prevented from meeting at their meeting place. We see that most clearly, I think, in the Apostle Paul's life, because he experienced something similar to what we are today, in that he was frequently prevented from meeting with the church freely. Many of us are wondering, what are we going to do while we are unable to go anywhere but our homes? We've been confined to one space, and we're not really sure exactly what we are able to do or what we should do. It looks as though that was never really an issue for Paul. Whether it was traveling or imprisoned, he always had one mission at the front of his mind: spread God's word. It could be argued that Paul actually did some of his best work, some of his best mission work while he was imprisoned. Paul spent the last, at least 4 years, and likely more like 6 years, in prison toward the end of his life. And it's from these years of imprisonment that Paul penned 5 of his most influential letters. Letters to the Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, to Philemon, and his second letter to Timothy. Paul did not let his circumstances dictate whether or not he stayed on mission. In fact, you can go and read about some of those circumstances in 2 Corinthians 11. Starting in verse 24, he says, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews 40 lashes less 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods, and once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Needless to say, Paul saw and experienced so much during his ministry. That list was just full of total chaos. And looking at that, it honestly seems that imprisonment, that was the least of Paul's problems. But again, Paul did not let those things on this list keep him from doing what he knew needed to be done. He did not deviate from the plan or his purpose. If you continue reading his other letters that he wrote to the other churches, you repeatedly see that no matter the issue, No matter the circumstance, no matter the obstacle, he just kept going. He saw every one of those things as just another opportunity to share the gospel with someone new. He saw every situation as his next chance to tell somebody about Jesus and his kingdom. And you can go to his letter to the Philippians, and right there at the very beginning, chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really helped or has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known to all the imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. Paul was writing this from Roman imprisonment. And he begins his letter to Philippi again by telling them that since he's being chained to different guards every day, he sees this as a great opportunity for telling them about Jesus. Paul doesn't see his imprisonment as an obstacle to be overcome. He rather sees it as an opportunity to get creative on how he can accomplish the mission for Jesus.
And when we consider what's happened to Paul, what Casey just read and spoke about, and many other of our brothers and sisters throughout the past, and all of these things the church has survived and even thrived in, we have to ask ourselves questions like this. If the church is not a building, and if we are the church, then what should the church be doing while we're not able to meet together at our building? Some of you might honestly be starting to feel like you're in prison. And we don't want you to feel that way, and we identify with you, and we're sorry. But we have to ask ourselves, even in these kinds of situations, what we're in, do we see this as only an obstacle for us to overcome? Or do we see this as an opportunity for us to grow in our understanding of what it means to be the church for one another and for our community? So tonight, as we close out this short Devo, we want to provide you with just a few actionable jumping off points as you think through how we can be the church in our current circumstance. And the list that we're going to give is by no means an exhaustive list. It's actually intended to get you thinking, to get your gears turning, so that you can think through some ideas on your own about how we can be the church to our communities and to the people around us. So we're going to provide some discussion material after this is over. But for those of you who are at home with your families more often, you can use this time right now, the time that you have so much with your kids right now, you can use it to intentionally disciple your kids by engaging in praying together often about what's happening in the world or about what they're thinking through. You can spend time teaching them the scriptures, and you can also spend time exploring creative ways to learn and talk about God in your home.
And for those of you who are very much in need of some social interaction with other human beings other than yourself and the thoughts that are going through your head, there are a lot of people within the church who would love to receive a phone call or a text or an email or even a card if you have the supplies.
Many of you live in neighborhoods where you have neighbors who might need to be checked in on. You need to make sure that they have what they need. And you can do that in careful ways, and you can ensure that you're not putting anyone at risk by asking them if they have any needs that you can meet for them.
Many of you are taking time to try and be more active and take walks throughout your neighborhoods to break up some of the monotony. That's great. Take this time to walk by and pray for your neighbors. And if they're outside, asking them again safely if they have any needs that are not being met.
For those of you who have jobs that are considered essential and throughout kind of the things getting more tough out there, that you will still be out and about working, you have a unique opportunity because you will still be out and about with other people. You have the opportunity to be an agent of peace in an otherwise chaotic world right now. People are looking for answers, and they're looking for people who have confidence about the future. And you have the ability to bring that to them as a Christian.
And for all of us during this time, offering prayer for people that we come across is usually a fairly non-threatening way to open the door for bigger conversations. And so, especially in this time where people are worried about what the future holds, that can be a great way to possibly open that door. And these are just a few of the options that we want to offer to you, and we hope that you at home will think of more. And if you want to add those to our comment section as a list to help us think of more ways, that'll be fantastic, and we would love that. We're going to include a discussion guide along with this video, both on our Facebook group and Facebook page, so please check those out to see if you can get that. Again, we want to give this as kind of an opportunity to brainstorm with yourself or with others at your home, ways that we can be the church where you are right now, with or without a building. We again want you to know that we love and we miss all of you very much, and we will continue praying that things continue to get better, that things get better and better each and every day. If you need anything, please let us know. Again, we love and we miss you, and we hope to see you all very, very soon. God bless. Cut.